Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Kavita Shah. Kavita is an award-winning vocalist, composer, researcher, and educator who makes work in deep engagement with the jazz tradition while also addressing and advancing its global sensibilities. In September 2023, after 7 years of immersing in the traditional mornas and coladeras of her idol Cesária Évora on the Atlantic island of São Vicente with Évora's former musical director and virtuoso guitarist Shah released her latest album, Verdean Blues, which The Guardian has called gorgeous. It is gorgeous, by the way. And the New York Times quietly riveting. She is the founder of Vocalist Records, a music label centering female voices from the global South. And she's here with us today. Thank you so much for being here for this conversation today, Kavita. How are you?
Thank you, Elle. It's a pleasure. I'm doing great and enjoying this summer weather. How are you?
I'm also doing great and still not used to the summer weather, despite a lifetime here in New York City. But I'm glad to hear that others are enjoying it. And after the winter we had, we need it, right? So
Yes.
I like to start each episode, each conversation with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
My first language that my mother spoke to me when I was a baby in is Gujarati, but my main language at home was English. She kind of switched to English because, like many parents in that generation, she was afraid that if she taught me another language, that I wouldn't become fluent in it. Spanish, French, Portuguese, Yoruba. I'm trying to go in order, so I'm thinking about the order. Hindi, Cape Verdean Creole, Italian.
That's nine. That's impressive. That's quite a roster.
Thank you. Just starting.
So how did these languages, you spoke about Gujarati, English, we know you're a New Yorker, so you've got English. The others, how did those come into your life? How did those start to come into your life, or how are they coming into your life currently?
Uh, well, Spanish was the second language I learned in school, starting in elementary school. Obviously, growing up in New York, it's a very vibrant language in the city. I sang in a children's choir, a professional children's choir from the age of 10.
Hmm.
And we did a lot of music in many different languages, over 30 languages. Our conductor, who's a MacArthur genius, he himself is of Dominican heritage and Francisco Nunez. And so we had maybe a little bit extra Spanish music, Spanish language music. And there were enough people in the choir, plus him, who spoke it fluently. So I feel that lent a sort of authenticity or deeper understanding of the language. And then when I was 16, I went to live with a family in Ecuador and I spent a summer there. And that's where I became fluent in Spanish. It stopped becoming just a subject I was good at in school. It became something alive, something that was, I'd have phrases in my head that my host mom would say to me, or that a friend would say to me. It became a living thing. It had importance. It had that human element. But when I came back, I kind of went really, really deep. I was taking college level classes and the AP, classes. And but I kind of would also just start reading books in Spanish, and I went really deep. I became very obsessed with it. A few years before, I started getting very into Latin music. So I would say music was a big part of it for me because I would learn songs faster than maybe a grammar exercise. And because I have such an oral memory, those
Mhm.
words would stay with me. And that was a big part of language learning. So I was very into especially like Cuban music. Buena Vista Social Club had come out a few years before. And then I had a very early Celia Cruz CD, like one of her earliest CDs. And, so that was what I was listening to. But then I discovered the bossa nova music of Antonio Carlos Jobim. I would start to learn that music. I played piano and I would sing at assemblies at my school. I would listen to the recording and read the lyrics online and kind of teach myself the Portuguese. So I didn't know it or fully understand it. And it's very sweet. I found a video of myself performing from this time. I must have been around 16. And my Portuguese is pretty good, but I didn't speak it yet. But it has a little Spanish, tinge to it. So that was really the introduction to Brazilian music, to the Portuguese language. Right before I went to college, I spent a summer in Paris and I did a French course for the summer. And so there, French entered my life and I studied it a little bit in college. I decided to major in Latin American studies, which was in a Romance language department. So half of my classes had to be in Spanish and Portuguese literature. And then the other half could be anything relating to Latin America. I had to take Portuguese for this major, guys. I had to formally learn it. So I started a class called Portuguese for Spanish speakers. I was like a fish in water. It was the fastest language I've ever learned and the easiest language I've ever learned. It just kind of went really quickly. And the second semester I was taking, second semester beginner Portuguese at the same time as I was taking a graduate seminar in Portuguese. I then went to live in Brazil. I'm 20 years old. I'm living in Salvador da Bahia. I'm doing a semester abroad and I am doing research on Afro-Brazilian music. I worked with a local carnival group that, through their lyrics, raised Black consciousness in this very poor community through using tropes of this Black diaspora. So through using inspiration from African liberation movements, from the US civil rights movements, and even from Afro-Brazilian slave revolts and slave rebellions in Brazilian history. I think for me, as a member of a diaspora, my parents are from India, to witness that and having grown up in the US and having experienced a lot of racism in New York City, which a lot of people don't understand. You would think it's counterintuitive because it's such a diverse place, and yet my childhood was very marked by kind of being the only one and suffering a lot. So as early as 10, I started getting very into jazz music. And I'm sure part of that was identifying to some degree as a person of color and with this kind of history and then the sonic history that came out of the Black American experience. So for me to be in Bahia and to see this kind of powerful reframing of identity in a transnational diasporic way, that really awoken something in me. And then at some point I decided I really want to I want to learn more non-Western languages. I want to learn the lingua franca of my origins, which is Hindi. Hindi is not my mother tongue, but it is the kind of English in northern India. It's the most spoken language. So I studied it for about 2 years in New York. At the same time I was starting my career as a musician. I was beginning. I found a great teacher at Columbia and he was wonderful. So I learned the script. I learned the pronunciation. I can still read and write like a 5-year-old, but there were a lot of things that were very familiar to me because I knew a lot of words. I understood the pronunciation, but it's still a language I'd like to master. I would say I'm an intermediate level, and it's still something that I wish I had more time for. All of these languages that I speak and that I'm fluent in, I either lived in the country or spent a lot of time in an environment where I could really get fluent. And like I said, where it becomes something more than words on a page, where it becomes meaning, poetry, currency between humans. It really becomes alive. And that for me is the exciting part. It's funny to talk about my life in terms of language learning and not my musical trajectory, because they're both actually quite side by side. At this time when I'm learning Hindi, I'm really starting my career as a jazz singer, as a musician. And then after I release my first album, Visions, and start recording and start touring, I needed a break at some point from the New York life and the hustle and the industry. And I took a sabbatical trip across Africa for 3 months. And we spent 1 month or a little more actually in Cape Verde. So when I was living in Salvador de Bahia, I got to see Cesária Évora perform live.
You did? Oh, tell me everything.
It was a festival called África Brasil, and it was celebrating Dia de Consciência Negra, Day of Black Consciousness. It's just so amazing that that exists as it's a federal holiday. And there were artists from all over the diaspora performing. And I had already heard her music and was drawn to it, but just recently. And at this time, also, I had gone through a lot of loss. My father passed away. Two of my four grandparents passed away, and the other two died very soon after. So I was becoming a person in the world and also going through a lot of grief. And something about her music is very consoling and also very much about this diasporic longing, diasporic grief. And seeing her perform, though, beyond the music was just a life-changing experience. She did not do anything to entertain others, to please others. She was just completely radically herself, smoking, drinking, barefoot. She had so much power. To see that kind of inner strength come through the music and come through that sort of presence, and to see a woman of color and a Black woman not performing, not bending herself to other people, but rather kind of inviting people in, was extremely powerful. And I knew I want to sing like that. And I also knew there's something here that I need to know more about. One day I'll go to Cape Verde. Finally, we went very quickly. I became friends with her many musicians and people that were around her. Without planning anything, I didn't even realize where we were going. The Airbnb we stayed in turned out to be a few doors down from her former house. Lots of coincidences happening. And very quickly, I basically met her guitarist, Bao, and we began working together. It started in a very explorational way, just like language learning to some degree. I mean, I think there's this part of me that when I think of music and language, it's experiential. It's finding something, hearing things, imitating, experiencing it as a very visceral thing, as a very corporal thing. And it was the same with learning Cape Verdean music. And so people speak Portuguese there. They speak Portuguese from Portugal, which is very different from Brazilian Portuguese. It still to this day, sometimes the people that I work with in Portugal, sometimes I have to ask them to either speak in English or to put on a Brazilian accent, because sometimes it's so hard to understand the Portuguese accent. Although now that I've been spending so much time in Cape Verde and Portugal, my Brazilian accent has now moved and sounds more Portuguese. And last time I was in Brazil, they asked me if I was from Portugal, and I was so ashamed.
Oh no.
Not because there's anything wrong with the Portuguese accent, but because, Brazil is my heart. That's where I learned the language.
Yeah.
So I could communicate in Portuguese, but all the lyrics are in Cape Verdean Creole. It's a different language. And so that language started with learning the lyrics, learning the songs, learning the pronunciation, learning some words, kind of just spending time there. And then I studied it formally. And it's also a hard language to study because it's a very oral language. Only recently have they developed a system for writing it down and standardizing grammar and standardizing spelling. I have my teacher who's a university professor in Praia, and she's Polish, and she's an expert on Cape Verdean Creole. And she will help me, with the standardization spellings. If I show that to the elder musicians in São Vicente, they're like, no, that's not how you spell it, because that's not how they spelled it in their day. And so it's a very interesting thing to learn, very oral and living language.
I love this journey that you just took us on, because with this show and having these conversations, talking to people and realizing that a lot of us learn our languages in a classroom. A lot of us learn them just kind of, at least in the beginning, just like detached from being able to use them. And as you said, in your experience when you studied, when you lived abroad, you felt it come alive for the first time. I think that is such a wonderful experience to have at a young age, because at that age we're very much in the classroom, and class is our whole life. So being able to take it out and I guess build that confidence probably set you on this whole journey in the first place, because you felt confident and you felt like you had an actual example of what language can do and what learning and being able to communicate in a language can do. As a musician, and how languages play into music and learning music. And even for me as a non-musician, desperately a non-musician who cannot understand anything about music, music is a language too, and music is a language that people learn and people play with and interpret on their own. And I'm so glad that you're a jazz musician, because I've always wanted to ask this question. But as I see jazz as a way of taking a constructed language, breaking it down and reinterpreting it into something else, and something that is tangible, something that is outside of the classroom, something that can reach the people, and realizing that language is the same thing, or studying language is the same thing. So as you have learned music, as you've played jazz, as you've learned different languages and you've learned to take that to communicate with different people, how does that feel for you to be able to do that? How does that live in your mind? How does that live through your work?
I think that's a really beautiful observation you made about jazz music, which is improvisational in nature, being really similar to language learning, where you learn a set of phrases, grammar, syntax, but then what you do live is like constructing a conversation. It's spontaneous. It's based on that knowledge, but then you sort of come up and conjure it. And it's similar to language learning. You can do all these exercises and learn all these phrases, but in real life, when you're lost and you're asking someone for directions, you don't have your phrase book. You don't, you kind of, and to get to a place of fluency, you are also able to conjure those phrases at any given moment. And that's what expertise is in both, I would say, improvisation and language learning. Another thing, though, that what you were saying reminded me of, when I was growing up in the choir, the Young People's Chorus of New York City, as I mentioned, we sang in over 30 languages, and we would always have a language expert come in, and it could be somebody's mom or dad. It could be another artist, but we would sing in Norwegian, we would sing in Hebrew, we would sing in Swahili, we did a beautiful Inuit chant. We did all kinds of music. So there was this value of making whatever we did extremely authentic. And that was a value not just for language, but also for sound. If we were singing a gospel song, it should really be as authentic as possible to a gospel sound. If we were singing Brahms in German, we should try to get the German as perfect as possible and kind of get the idiomatic feel. I think what that gave me is an awareness in my body of different sonorities, different ways of being, I would say. And it also gave me some connection to those different cultures. To this day, if I meet somebody from Hungary, or from the Czech Republic, I think of this song that I used to sing when I was 12 or 13. That was my first entry point into understanding this culture, this other way of thinking. I think there's something about empathy there, where you're trying to, that attempt to be authentic or to understand the nuance of a particular culture or a particular language. I think that requires deep empathy. I think that's something where music and language also connect. Well, this is a really deep thought that I had when you were saying that about my journey. I think part of it is also that I never felt at home growing up in the United States. I was always told, well, either you're Indian or you're American. And I felt like this binary being imposed on me. And even what it was to be quote unquote Indian stereotypically did not match my experiences growing up. My family was very liberal, and we didn't watch Bollywood movies, and we didn't kind of do these stereotypical things that everybody, whether South Asian or whether, American, were telling me this is what it means to be Indian. And yet my grandmother was living with us and she wore saris and we had traditional food, and I spent so much time in India. And feeling that these boxes don't belong to me, this quote unquote box of American, this quote unquote box of Indian. And also, like you, I'm a New Yorker, and it's kind of its own identity. And I think not feeling at home, there's something about learning other languages or other cultures that's looking for a sense of home, looking for other ways of being. As you know, in each language, you have expressions, you have nuances that may not exist in another language. And it's almost like a way for me to find myself and to construct homes. I don't have to go into this binary or that binary. Here's another way of being. Here's another way of seeing things, which I think also comes from a deep emotional place and a place of at least searching for empathy.
Mm-hmm. I wrote down the word boxes because I wanted to say something about being in a box and looking for what's outside of the box. And I think that, like you said, you wouldn't expect in New York City, which is so multicultural, to feel boxed in because there's so much around us. But then there's also a lot of like grouping of people and judging if you're enough to fit into that group. So I do completely understand, where that would come from and where that feeling and that sentiment of wanting to belong or wanting to connect to other cultures and other parts of the world. You've woven a tapestry of your experiences and your languages that only you can do. And you've made this your life. This has become your life. And I think not many of us are lucky enough or fortunate enough to have the opportunity to draw upon most of the world or much of the world to make up who we are, to make up how we see ourselves and how we walk through the world. And I think it's tremendous that you've been able to do that.
Thank you. I think part of it is also, it's not just about my own identity. I think it's also when I lost my dad and my grandparents at a relatively young age, there was a sense of kind of searching for home and searching for connection and the wisdom and the love that would have come from that sort of ancestral home that was now gone. I don't have a home anymore in India. It became pieced together by the love that I've received in these different places. Mm-hmm. And I would say the wisdom of elders, especially with musical traditions. In the jazz tradition, you have a really strong mentorship relationship. Historically, there were no schools to learn jazz. Often what would happen was a younger musician would join an elder musician's band and they would be hazed. But in the process, kind of learn everything. And there was a lot of good stuff and there was some bad stuff, including drugs. This kind of intergenerational relationship where this was an oral music. This was an oral tradition that was passed down from generations. And to this day, now, of course, there's conservatories, there's people that can have degrees in jazz, including myself. I have a master's in jazz. That doesn't replace that relationship of learning on the bandstand and learning from elders. There's so many things that you learn about the music that is passed down still orally, and stories about the histories of songs or musicians, that's passed down from the elders and the people who were there. My relationship with my elders in the jazz tradition is very important to me. And when I have studied other music like Cape Verdean Morna, it's been very important to me to seek out the elders and both have their blessing, as well as have their knowledge. And I think when I'm interested in different kinds of musical traditions, I have a Western classical training. And what I kind of like to do is combine my knowledge that I have, where I'm able to write music and read music, with this value of oral tradition. It's interesting because I've never talked about it. I usually talk about music and language as like a footnote. And it's funny to talk to you about language with music as a footnote, because I see how much the process is really similar for me.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, yes, you can learn all the syntax in the book, you can have the perfect grammar, but if you don't know how to sort of shoot the shit, if you don't know how to, find little nuances, and you're missing the heart of the language. And I would say it's the same with the music. Nobody cares if your pronunciation is perfect or if the notes are perfect, but if you get the feeling, everybody can feel that. And I feel that in the Cape Verdean Morna, the master guitarist Bao, who's been my mentor, who is Cesária's musical director, he's in his 60s, and he always talks about the Morna, which is this beautiful, haunting ballad form. He talks about it as sentimento, as feeling. And he says what makes the Morna is feeling. It's similar to the blues in the US. Blues is not about perfect intonation and perfect, what makes the blues, or what makes you feel it, is the feeling that the singer has. I always feel good when he tells me, like, that had a lot of feeling, or you had a lot of feeling in that, or you feel the Morna. For me, that's like, okay, I got it. I understood it. I did my job. And again, I think that comes from a place of empathy.
I want to take a step back to talk a bit about your time in Cape Verde. And you're coming there as a Portuguese speaker already, and you are, you're stepping into this beautiful island nation, and you're encountering Cape Verdean Creole for the first time. Um, and not for the first time, because you've been listening to Cesaria, so you're versed, you're familiar. What was that experience like? What was it like for you?
It felt a lot like when I went to live in Brazil for the first time. I was very conscious of the fact that I wanted to experience this place with my whole body. And I turned off my phone for the first week that I was there. I had a landline, and I would just kind of go around and talk to people and ask people, where is this thing and how do I get there? And my husband wanted to buy a guitar. We went to a local music store and we asked them, where can we buy a guitar? And they said, well, you can go to Aniceto Gomez, is a famous luthier, guitar maker. And I said, okay, how do I go there? And they said, just take that bus. Take the bus to the address they gave me was behind the cemetery. Okay. So I go to the bus stop across the street, or two, a block away. And I'm thinking, how am I going to find this place? And a bus comes up and it has the word cemiterio on it. So I said, okay, well, this is the cemetery bus. So I got to take this bus. And I got on the bus and I asked them, I'm trying to go to this person and he lives behind the cemetery. So he's like, okay, just sit down. And, when we get to the cemetery, he calls me up and he asks someone on the street, and they point me in the direction of the place. And that's the vibe there, and I met Aniceto, and Aniceto's the one who introduced me to Bao, the guitar player, and everything kind of started from there. But it was a very experiential journey. it was kind of very similar to improvising in that you trust and you kind of have to rely on trust that I'm going to find this person, trust that I'm going to find this place, trust that I'm going to have a good time here, that I'm going to learn something, that I'm going to enjoy myself. And I was just overcome the day that I arrived. I was very sick on the plane. I was on a plane from Ghana to Senegal to Praia, the capital of Cape Verde, and then to Mindelo. And I got very sick and it was overnight and I arrived, I was exhausted. I went to sleep and I woke up in the middle of the afternoon and walked outside and it was just paradise. And I remember arriving to the beach and kissing the ground. It was this overwhelming feeling of home. I just felt so good there.
Yeah.
And I can't explain why, I can't tell you. Well, I can now. Now, the reason I think why is Cape Verde is the world's first Creole society. It was uninhabited when the Portuguese colonized it, and it was a center of the Portuguese slave trade, but it was not inhabited before. It's been a place where obviously you have African slaves, you have Portuguese, but also the British had a coal refueling station in the 1800s. Many ships passed through there as a result. Because it's so isolated, because it's so arid, because it's so poor, the whole history of the place has been marked by immigration and migration and leaving and coming back and sometimes never coming back. And so the kind of whole consciousness of the place is well, first is beautiful, right? It's just like, it's really, really, really beautiful. I say it's like Hawaii without the tourists. There's this perpetual saudade, because there's no other word to say this. And saudade in Creole, which is saudade in Portuguese, describes a sense of longing. And I would say it's not just longing for someone or something that you love or a place that you love, but it's especially for a place that you can't have back. So I'd say it's a diasporic longing. It's a history of a place where people left, perhaps never to return, whether that was slaves, whether that was migrants, whether that was whalers or shippers or sailors. It's kind of part of the fabric of the consciousness. And it's such a deep part of the music. And for all the things we were talking about with belonging, with searching, with, not having kind of this fixed sense of home, that impermanence that exists in Cape Verde, it feels very at home because I feel very at home with that emotion. It's the same saudade that I grew up with in my house, that I witness my parents have for their homeland, for things they couldn't have back, for, I don't know if you remember growing up, like it was so expensive to make phone calls. Phone calls weren't even regular
yeah.
thing. And those aerograms or those letters would come in the mail that said airmail, and it was still that era where our world was not as connected. And I think that sense of saudade, but I'm sure it still exists, deeply for a lot of migrants, a lot of people straddling different cultures, different identities, different places.
Isn't it crazy to like feel that before you even know that there is a word that exists in any language that can encompass that feeling? Like that must have been such a profound moment for you, or a time period for you when you're recognizing like, oh, there's a word and now I understand what that word is and what it's connected to, and this is what I had been feeling.
And I don't know that I felt it until later in life or until I lost people in my family, but I think I saw my family feeling it. I saw my parents feeling it. I witnessed what that was for them, and then I felt it. And then I found the language for it. Through the Cape Verdean Morna.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
It is. It really is.
And it's also cool that it kind of found me too, because I happened to be living a few blocks away from where Cesária performed in Salvador. I years later met Cape Verdean woman sold me my wedding dress, and her mother is a famous singer from Cape Verde named Fansha who sang on my album years later,
Mm-hmm.
and who was childhood sweethearts with Bao and Cesaria's protege and played with Bao for many, many years and happens to live in New York now. Even during the time when we already know my serendipitous meeting of Bao. Then years later, during the time I was working on the album, but kind of putting it off and, COVID days, and I was on vacation in Curacao.
Mm.
So in the Caribbean, Dutch Caribbean, which I think would have nothing to do with Cape Verde. And I'd go to a museum about traditional music, about a musician named Shon Kola and this percussion practice from Curacao. And the whole time I'm there, there's a beautiful language there. I don't know if you've done a podcast on Papiamento, but
Papiamento.
yeah, oh my God.
Yeah.
The whole time I'm there, I'm like, these words are sounding a little familiar. It's similar to Cape Verdean Creole, and maybe because of the Spanish. And I go to the museum and I look on the wall, and there is a chart comparing Papiamento to Cape Verdean Creole
Wow.
and showing how many slaves passed through Cape Verde on their way to Curacao,
Mm.
and they were baptized in Cape Verde, so they had to stay there for a good amount of time.
Mm.
And because of that, there was some sort of linguistic standardization happening because people had to communicate. And that then came to the New World. And that's part of what influenced Papiamento.
Mm.
And seeing that, I was like, this is crazy. And I'm here on vacation. I'm trying to avoid my work and the things I have to do. But it's kind of like all these things in the world kept bringing me there. And I
Mm.
really feel like Cesaria is a guardian angel
I was thinking
for
the
me.
exact thing. I'm like, she's watching over you in a way. Like her music is watching over you. It's maybe guiding you. I'm into that stuff. I don't know if you are. I don't know if our listeners are, but I'm very I can go there given
Yeah,
the time, but
it's it's just there. It's
yeah.
there.
So
And it's she's here.
um
She's here right here. I have a painting. I have a photograph of her on my wall looking down. And whether or not it's cosmic, there's just so many people in her life that have now been a part of my journey. So many people that were close to her that have been part of this beautiful journey of learning this music, learning this culture, the language. I didn't get to meet her while she was alive, but I feel her presence very strongly.
yeah, that really speaks to me, especially in the time that she grew to prominence in a time of, flashiness and excess in music and boastfulness in music, and especially what was projected upon female singers and musicians. And absolutely love what you said. It wasn't about her bending to what other people wanted, but her inviting other people into who she was and what she was about. And I could use some more of that attitude in my life. And I'm sure a lot of women around the world can use that kind of strength and that way of moving through the world. And it makes me want to ask you this question. You have a new album, Cape Verdean Blues. You have some covers of some well-known Cesaria songs on there. Well, I have two questions. Is number one, to cover Cesaria songs, what does that feel like? And two, is this a love letter to Cesaria?
My relationship with Cesaria has always been very personal.
Mhm.
She was a star, but I was not living in Europe. I was not living in Cape Verde. So no one around me was listening to her. It was my own personal relationship with it. Now, as an adult and doing the music, and I meet so many people who loved her, or my friends will say, "Oh, my mom loved Cesaria and would play her in the house," from all different cultures, from all around the world. But I didn't know her as a star. I knew her as this person I heard on my recording. It was Afro-Lusophone music,
Mm.
and whom I got to see perform a few months after I heard her on that recording. And then I gave that album to my husband, my boyfriend at the time, on what, in the beginning of our relationship, and we were going on vacation separately, and he was going with his friends, and I gave him Café Atlántico on a mix CD that he listened to and on the beach, and then became a part of our relationship. When we would go on vacation, we would put the CD in the car,
Mm-hmm.
So that was my experience of Cesária. And to sing those songs, it's very natural for me. And it's not something that, if you take any other kind of pop star, maybe everybody else around has that reference for it, or it means something. And now that I'm singing it, of course, the people that are listening have that reference for it. But I didn't experience that. It was just sort of me and my headphones and my, like the most private and beautiful part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very natural. It's kind of like singing along to your favorite songs. That's how it started. I would go to the beach in the morning, and in Mindelo, I would go to the beach, and then in the afternoon, I'd go with my headphones, and I knew the music, but now I'd write down the lyrics and try to learn the pronunciation. And then I'd go to Bao's house in the afternoon and I would sing it. And, that's just how it happened. It was, again, very natural. Through that process and through spending time there and through learning about the culture and her music, I learned a lot of other songs. I heard songs in the air. I heard other people performing different songs. I met a beautiful local composer named Vasco Martins. He's considered the classical composer of Cape Verde. And I did about half of her songs on my album, but the other half are songs I learned kind of in this journey. And absolutely, it's a love letter to Cesaria, but it's also a love letter to the journey that her voice, or searching for her, put me on.
Mm.
It's both of those things. Because some of the music is very different from what she sang and is very specific to maybe my skill set as a jazz singer, as a more interpretive artist, more loose phrasing. That works very well with Vasco's music, which is a little more intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both. It's her and me and the kind of journey and their relationship. I don't think of myself as an imitator. Imitation's a way to learn. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great way to understand things. There's things where I had to study. How did she phrase this? How did she approach this? But then the songs live within me, within my body, within my kind of musical understanding and expertise and ideation, especially as a jazz singer and an improviser,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of grows from there. And I would say Bao is the link between us, because he
Right.
played many of these songs with her, and now he's playing them with me. And so there's certain things I'm sure he's doing that is very traditional. But there's certain things I'm sure I challenge him to do, because the way that I sing is very different.
Mhm. I love the album, and
Thank you so
I
much.
really do. And I love, of the songs that I knew, of the Cesaria songs that I was familiar with, I'm always interested to hear how a musician is going to reinterpret, how they're going to take it and make it their own. I think you did a beautiful job with it. It's beautiful, and
Thank
it's
you.
it's really, I think it's really beautiful.
Well, part of the desire was to get back to a very traditional instrumentation
Mhm.
that's often not done anymore, especially by well-known singers, touring artists. And even many of those songs with Cesaria had string arrangements, had, very lush orchestrations. This project started with me and Bao in his house, and I kind of wanted to keep that intimacy
Mm.
and that stripped down nature. And we added percussion on some tracks, and we added guitar layers on some tracks, and we had a few guests throughout the album. But the idea was that you're in the living room as well,
Mhm.
and you're invited into that process. And you're also kind of hearing these songs as they were done in the 50s, in the 60s, in a really simple, traditional way, and preserving that tradition while also innovating within it, preserving that sonority, but also adding in improvisation, adding in some sort of modern arrangements and ways of approaching. That was kind of the intention with how we arrange some of those songs.
And I think that comes across because I don't feel, like you said, I don't feel like you are trying to imitate. It does feel, and I asked you the question about the love letter because it does feel like a love letter, whether it's specifically to Cesária, whether it's to the the style of music, the history of the way that this music has been created and is expressed. It does feel like that. It feels like there's a reverence that you're paying to what came
Thank
before
you.
you, and it comes across very beautifully.
Thank you. I would say it's also a love letter to the place
Mm,
and the people.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, as you were talking about it, I was just imagining being there and feeling that sense of home and looking out at the ocean or at the sand dunes or at the mountains, spending time with my friends, spending time with people, connecting with people who have come to my concerts, who've enjoyed the music. It's what in Portuguese we say convivência,
Mm.
which means to live with, living with. Conviver is the verb. It's really about that.
Can you please let us know where our curious listeners can hear Cape Verdean Blues?
Yes, you can hear Cape Verdean Blues and purchase it as well on Bandcamp, on iTunes, on Amazon Music, on Spotify, all the usual places, everywhere music can be found. YouTube, we have a beautiful music video called Joya. We're going to be publishing some new videos soon. So YouTube, it's Kavita Shah Music. Instagram, Canta Kavita. Facebook, Kavita Shah Music. Also, we have beautiful albums. We have CDs and we have vinyls.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that
Um,
vinyl's coming back.
they're selling like hotcakes.
I love
So
that.
those are available on Bandcamp to purchase, and we can ship them anywhere in the world.
Amazing. I will add links to all of those platforms in the show notes for this episode so that people who are curious and ready to listen can click and purchase and stream right away. I know that you have started a record label, Vocalist, and I would love to hear all about it. I'd love to hear how you started, what you're doing, and where you're going.
Yes, I'm so excited to share that I founded a new record label called Vocalist Records. Obviously, it's a lot of puns that make sense with the languages and with the music. Vocalist, as in folk, as in people, and storytelling. We've been talking a lot about oral traditions and language and in music. Vocalist, as in vocal music, which is often underappreciated. Vocalist, as in somebody who does culture,
Mm.
who creates links, who builds bridges. And so we released Cape Verdean Blues as the first album on Vocalist. And very soon we're going to release a beautiful singer-songwriter from Argentina named Juana Luna. And her album is called Canciones en Blanco y Negro, which means songs in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
She has taken beautiful folk songs as well as original music from this kind of old school Argentine countryside feeling, romantic dances, and she has modernized it with some string arrangements, and it's just stunning album. It's
Mm.
so beautiful. I can't wait for people to hear it. And I can't wait to continue growing Vocalist. And the idea for the label was to focus on artists from the global south, as well as female artists. We're not only focused on that, we're open to anything that's related to storytelling. I felt there was such a dearth in the music industry for celebrating female artists, for celebrating artists from the global south. I've had to deal with lots of challenges in my path that I would like to create a space that is artist focused, that is uplifting and positive. And also as an artist, I know what we need. I know what goes into everything. And it's time to have that control for
Mhm.
ourselves as artists and not give that power away. Also, this idea of creating community across the global south. My dream with vocalist is people come for the Cape Verdean music and then they discover Argentine music. Somebody comes from Argentina and discovers music from India. And there will be in the future online festivals, online ways to gather where you can have these audiences cross-pollinate each other and directly connect and build community.
Mhm.
So that's my vision for Vocalist. That's what I hope will happen in the near future. And we're just getting started. So I can't wait for people to hear Juana's
Oh
album.
my gosh. I can't wait to see what is to come from vocalists. And, that's just personally speaking, because I love music from so many parts of the world that I don't really feel get recognized, especially in the United States. I feel like we don't hear enough. And we don't support those artists enough who are keeping their languages and keeping their traditions and their cultures alive
Absolutely.
through music. So I think this is such an important record label is such an important endeavor that you are embarking on. And I
Thank you.
wish you so much success. I cannot wait to see what's coming next.
Thank you so much. It's kind of the embodiment of everything we've spoken about today.
Right,
It's
definitely.
it's creating a digital place, a physical place for it's kind of a gallery for all of those cultures, all of those places, all those languages, and not just a gallery where people can observe and enjoy and listen, but a conversation where people can meet and interact and discover new things.
Yeah, yeah. Please keep me in mind as you move forward with vocalists
I
because
will.
and please come back and talk to us more about music and more about the artists that you are
Anytime. Music
representing
and
and
music and languages is like you told me that. I said, okay, well,
absolutely.
anytime.
I'm so glad to have found you because
Thank
this is
you.
what I want to do with this show. Like, you know, you have shown us and you've talked to us about your journey with languages and with music, and I want to be able to talk to people who use language in a unique way and who utilize language in a unique way, and love using languages in unique ways and have made it a part of themselves. And I think that you embody that so wonderfully, so masterfully, so skillfully. And please tell us about what you are up to with touring and any live shows that you have coming our way. I'd love to share those with our audience as well.
Well, this is very exciting because uh, we're gonna extend the Cape Verdean Blues tour. And from August to December, we will be on tour again. So August will be back in Cape Verde for the Mindel Jazz Festival. It's a huge outdoor festival. Can't wait for that. And then most of your listeners will be happy to hear we'll be in the United States from the end of September through mid-October. And we're going to play in Chicago, in DC, in New York, in Vermont, in Boulder, Colorado, in Tucson, Arizona, and maybe one or two more places yet to be confirmed. But you can find those dates on my website, kavitashahmusic.com. We'll be putting up tickets soon. And we'd love to see you out there and love to share Cape Verdean Blues with all of you.
I will be there. I'll be there.
New York's going to be October 7th at Joe's
Okay.
Pub.
Oh, great. Okay. No, I'll add those links also. So that people can come out and support and see you play live. I cannot wait to see you play live. I cannot wait to see you play these songs live. So, oh my
You
gosh.
know what's so beautiful? As we were talking about Cesária and the journey, what's very beautiful is she touched the lives of so many people, including yourself. And I'm getting to meet some of those people like you
Mm,
through her, you know?
yeah.
Um, it's like a gift that keeps expanding, keeps growing. And some people have said, well, why do songs that she already did? Or, what's the point of this? And the point is that she died in 2011, and it's important to keep her memory alive. It's important to keep this traditional music alive. Not a lot of people in the younger generation are playing this music anymore.
Mm.
And in fact, they think it's cheesy, or they think it's, old school. And you have some amazing musicians who are not learning the tradition and who are just kind of trying to make the next hit. And even if they have the skill set. And so, yes, she did it, and she did a great job. I like to think that I also do a great job, and I do it differently than she did. But um, it's giving that chance for people to remember her
Mm.
and
And
find
discover
something.
her even maybe for the first time through
Both.
you. Yeah.
I'm just saying that I think she also brought us together, and I'm glad to meet you through your love of Cesaria. And it brought us together to talk about languages and music, things that we both love.
Yes. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and having this conversation. And I echo your sentiment. I don't meet people often who see the world or experience the world the way that I want to. And I haven't really been able to travel and do as much as I want. But, people who see the world the way that I do and people who want to move through the world in a similar fashion. So we should raise a glass of rum to Cesaria. Our our
A glass of grog, grog.
grog.
Grog is like it's like ouzo. It's really harsh liquor,
Oh,
and they often put it with some honey, and then
mm,
they call it ponche, like punch.
ponche.
Yeah. So we can raise a glass
ra-
of grog.
Raise a glass of
Yeah.
grog to Cesaria
Yes.
for bringing us together. Uh,
Yes.
Kavita, I have enjoyed this conversation with you so much. We
Likewise.
could go on forever and ever, I'm sure. So you'll just have to come back
Anytime.
whenever you want. I like to end each episode on the same question just to have a little bit of fun. Do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words,
Oh my
idioms,
God.
words of wisdom, or words of advice in any of your 9 languages to share and to teach us?
Well, we already talked about the word saudade in Creole,
Mhm.
saudade in Portuguese, and the way it's used colloquially is eu tenho saudade de você. I have saudades of you. I miss you. Or you just say saudade, which is kind of conveying that I miss you, but it's different from I miss you. It's not
Mm.
quite I miss you. It
Mhm.
can just be like, God, it's been a long time.
Oh.
Or hope to see you soon,
Mm.
or this reminded me of you.
Mhm.
It's a feeling more than I miss you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so obviously that word is very special to me. Comes from even before Creole. I mean, it comes from really learning Portuguese in Brazil. Okay, in Gujarati, there's a phrase, barabar che. Barabar
Barabar
che.
che. Barabar che.
Barabar che. It's
Barabar.
like if it's a question, is it good? Is it okay? Is it right? Or it's good, it's correct, it's right.
Okay.
It's funny, the one that came to me in French is laisse tomber,
Laisse tomber.
which is let it go.
Mhm.
It literally means let it fall.
Mm.
So let's say you're talking about something, or you're like, oh, I need this thing, or I can't find it. Just forget it, like laisse tomber. But it also has this deeper feeling of let it go,
Mm.
like
Mhm.
it doesn't matter, just laisse tomber.
Yeah.
Literally let it fall. The
Yeah.
things that we hold inside, let it
Mhm.
fall.
Thank you so much for sharing those with us. Before I let you go, now you have 9 languages to choose from once again. But in this situation, you've been having a conversation with someone for quite some time, but it's time for you to go your separate ways. In the first language that comes to mind, without giving it any thought, what is the best way to say goodbye?
That's a really deep question, because it's not about the language. What's the best way to say goodbye?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, what kind of goodbye,
Oh yeah. Well, you've let's say
But I'm saying in general,
Yeah.
this is how your words sat with me.
Hmm.
There's different goodbyes, you know.
Hmm.
There's emotional goodbyes, there's saying goodbye to a loved one, there's um uh ciao, see you later. So I'll do it in Portuguese. So adeus is goodbye.
Adeus.
Adeus, like literally Deus being God.
Mhm.
Adeus, like
Adeus.
adios.
Hmm.
Até logo.
Até logo.
See you later. See you soon.
Hmm.
Até mais.
Até mais.
Até já.
Até já. I don't know
That's my
that one.
favorite one. So já means already or kind of soon. So
Hmm.
até já is like it's like see you soon, but literally it's like until soon, you
Oh.
know? So let's say we're gonna meet again in a few hours.
Hmm.
Até já.
Até já. I like that one.
I like that one too.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that
It
one.
means we'll meet soon. So até já.
Até já, Kavita. Thank you so much again for this conversation, and I'll be
Thank you,
talking to you
Elle.
soon.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.